Welcome back. We are ready to begin in a new area of studies. We look at the time of the kings, and we're going to begin lesson 19, which is a lesson on Saul, the very first king. Story is found for Samuel 9 to 31, although we're primarily going to be focusing on chapters 9 to 15 today. And starts out for Samuel 8, 3 through 7. The people are clamoring for a king. We want a king. We want a king. Give us a king. Well, their excuse was because Samuel was getting old. And his sons, well, they just weren't like Samuel. They were doing some bad things, some evil things. So that was their excuse. But the real reason, well, number one, verses 5 and verse 20 of chapter 8, 1 Samuel, I think kind of tells us they wanted to be like everybody else. Everybody else had a king. They wanted a king. They probably saw this to an answer as an answer to their problems. Remember, we've been through the time of judges, repetitious cycles of problems and struggles and victories, but then problems and struggles, all of it because of their sin. Well, they thought the king could solve all this. You see, they weren't willing to admit the problem was coming from within, not from without. It was from within. There was disobedience, rebellion against God's commands and the things that he had told them. That's really the reason they thought this would make it easier. The reality, mm, verse 7, Samuel said, "You're not really rejecting me or my sons. You're rejecting God. See, God has been your only king all this time. From the beginning of Israel till now, only God has been the king, the leader. And you're saying we want somebody physical, somebody that we can see, somebody that we can touch. Really, you're rejecting God, guys. He tried to warn them in 1 Samuel 8, 10 to 22, and he said, it's not going to be always great like you think it's going to be. In fact, you're going to find out that kings are going to demand you do things. They're going to take charge. They're going to rule. They're going to force your sons and your daughters into service. He said, it's not going to be all the good stuff that you're thinking. I'm trying to tell you that the people insisted. We want a king. Got it? Kind of reminds me of some of the philosophy of the day we live in. I want it, and I want it now. Got it? Scary. Finally, the Lord gave permission. He said, okay, Samuel, I'm going to give them a king of my choice. You let them know what the standards are, what has to be, but I'm going to give them. You said, well, then God was okay with it. No, he wasn't. He knew where it was going to lead. But there comes a time when sometimes God gives us what we beg for, even though he knows it's not really good for us, but he does it because he knows that's the only way that we're going to learn a lesson. So I would like to warn you, be real careful in what you try to twist God's arm to get, even though it looks good and you think it would be good. Be really careful in twisting his arm. Make sure, as we've talked about before, that you're following his leading and his direction. Start inside. That's where the answer lies. Well, 1 Samuel 9 to 11, it's time to choose and reveal that king. God uses donkeys. I don't know. God must have a thing for donkeys. Remember the story of Balaam? It was a donkey that tried to talk to Balaam and get him straightened out, and he wouldn't listen. But again, donkeys are lost. They've been lost a total of about 3 days by the time we get to the finale here. We don't know for sure if Saul and his servant were out the whole 3 days or only the whole last day, or don't really know. they've been lost about 3 days, and Saul and his servant have been searching everywhere trying to find him. They've gone from community to community, from location to they can't find him anywhere. And finally, the servant says, "Hey, I heard the seer." Well, that was kind of the name they called the prophet of that day. The seer is close by. Let's go. Let's go talk to him. Maybe he can tell us. Saul said, "Man, I don't have anything to give him." The servant says, "Oh, I've got a little bit here. I'll give it to him. Let's go talk to him, okay?" Hey, okay. So they head out to meet the seer. Well, the seer, who is Samuel, by the way, he had already been forewarned by God. Not in a bad sense, but just letting him know, giving an alert. There's going to be a man come see you tomorrow. He's going to be looking for his father's donkeys. Anyhow, when he does, I'm going to let you know he's the one I've chosen to be king, and you are to anoint him for that position. Well, Saul and his servant come up, and they see a man walking down the street, don't know who he is. They've heard of him, but they don't know what he looks like. So they just see a man, and Saul says, "Can you tell us where the seer lives, or where he's staying right now? We need to talk to him." Samuel says, "Ah." He recognizes God puts inside him. This is him. He says, "I'm the seer. Oh, by the way, I want you guys to come and eat with me tonight. A great meal has been prepared, and you're going to be the honored guest." Whoa, that was a shocker. They weren't expecting that. In fact, he says, "Saul, God's favor's on you." Saul's going, "Oh my, okay. Whatever you say, yeah, we'll come eat with you." So I'll tell you afterwards the answer to what you're looking for, and give you some instructions and all. And so come on and eat with me. And by the way, your father's donkeys have all been found. I'll let you know that up front, okay? But there's some more things I need to tell you. But come eat with me and spend the night, and then I'll tell you first thing in the morning as you start home to go greet your father. Okay, so they stay, they eat, they go to bed, they get up in the morning, and morning comes, it's time to break a day, they're ready to head out. And Samuel says, "Tell your servant to go on ahead. I want to share something with you. It's right now, it's just between you, me, and God." Saul says, "Okay." He's already wondering what in the world's going on. So the servant goes ahead, and Samuel begins to tell him, says, takes the oil out and anoints him. He says, "You're to be the king of Israel." As oil is dripping down over his head, Saul's going, uh, "Me? Well, wait. I'm from the tribe of Benjamin. That's the smallest tribe in Israel. Oh, and I'm the son of Kish. We're the smallest family, even in Benjamin. In other words, I'm the least of the least." You sure you got your directions right? Oh, yeah. Yep. God showed me. In fact, just so that you know that it's not just me, but it is really God. Remember what we talked about in past lessons. It's important that we make sure the message is from God, not from what's in our own hearts. Well, he says, "I want you to know that it's actually from God, not just for me." So as you start out home, well, you're going to meet two men when you come up close to Rachel's sepulcher, her grave. And they're going to come up to you, and they're going to run up, and they're going to say, "Hey, your donkeys have been found, and your dad is beginning to worry himself sick about you. You need to get home." Okay. And then he says, "You're going to go a little bit further. When you get in the plain of Tabor that leads to Bethel, why, you're going to meet three men. One will have 3 young goats with him. One will be carrying 3 loaves of bread, and one will have a bottle of wine. Oh, and the one with the bread, he's going to give you a couple loaves." Okay. They're, and when you see them, they're going to salute you and give honor to you. Oh, and then after you leave them, you go a little bit further, and there's going to be a company of prophets as you come close to Gibeah. And when you see them and they're out prophesying, etc., why the Spirit of God is going to come upon you and you're going to be turned into another man. Whoa. I believe God does speak to people and tell us things, but let me tell you something. When God speaks, it's specifics. It's not some generality that will apply to 90% of the people we're talking to. I mean, a message from God can be for everybody, yes, but when it's a specific word from God to an individual, God is specific. That way we know it is God, not just some man with good intentions that's trying to be, well, spiritual. Be careful. Make sure the message is from God. They begin the journey, and sure enough, step by step, everything that Samuel has said comes to pass just as he had told Saul it would. Well, then it comes time for Samuel to reveal God's choice to the people. So he shows up in the hometown of Saul, and he begins to announce to the people that are there that God's getting ready to reveal his will to them. And he tells them, he says, I want you to come before me tribe by tribe. We'll take the tribe that God has chosen, and then clan by clan, and then family by family. And finally, we'll go individual by individual until you can see who God has chosen. So they do that, and they march, march, and march. And it comes down to Saul's family. And hey, you got one more son. He's the one God's chosen. Where is he? Uh, don't know. I wonder if Saul forgot. No, no. Saul had hidden himself because it was scaring him to death. I can't be king. Wow. He recognized the importance, and he didn't feel worthy of it at all. So he had hidden. And so Samuel went to God and said, God told him, yeah, Saul's hiding. He's over here. So they went and got him, brought him out. He stood a head and shoulders above. He was good looking. He was big. He was strong. But more importantly, he was God's choice. And the people welcomed him. They were excited to find him. And the Spirit of the Lord, just came upon him and landed upon Saul, so to speak, and rested and resided upon him to guide him and direct him. And Saul then slew the yoke of oxen, and he sent pieces of it throughout Israel. Because why? Well, the Ammonites had begun to come up against Jabes Gilead, and they had said, we're going to destroy you. The only way you can, we'll make peace if every man there will poke out your right eyes. Well, they knew that there's going to be more requests, so they sent for help. Saul heard about it, and that's when he slew the oxen. He killed them, and the Spirit of God was upon him, and he sent warning throughout all of Israel, and he said, hey guys, here's the deal. God's anointed me to be king. The people have accepted me that I'm going to be king. Well, we might as well get started here. We have a need. And if you don't show up for battle to take care of these people that we've entrusted ourselves to take care of, then this is what's going to happen to all your oxen. And he sent notice out. They came, they gathered around Saul. Saul went into war, and God gave them a mighty victory. And thus Israel again was confirmed. So, chapter 11, verse 12 to 15, they anointed Saul to be the king in Gilgal. Wow, things are really going good, aren't they? What a man. Problem. Saul fell to a very dangerous enemy. The enemy is called pride. He began to let it come into his spirit somehow and swell up within him until he began to think, look who I am. And he wanted credit for everything. In fact, we find it chapter 13, 2 through 4, Jonathan goes out and God gives him a mighty victory over the Philistine outpost at Geba. And Saul sends a message out, look what Saul's done. Wasn't Saul? It's his son, for crying out loud. Give credit to whom credit is due, right? I mean, number one, to God, but then to his servant, don't look what I've done. Well, then we find that they're getting ready for battle. And they're at Gilgal waiting. The enemy's coming, and Samuel's supposed to be there to make an offering so that they can go with the blessings of God into war. And Samuel doesn't come quite as quick as he's supposed to. So Saul says, well, hey, I'm king. I'm just as important as a prophet. He anointed me, after all. And the Spirit has come upon me. I've even prophesied with the prophets, right? So I'll make the offering so we can get this thing get the show on the road and get going. So he makes the offering and he just finishes it. When Samuel comes, he says, what are you doing? Saul says, well, yeah, you were late getting here, man. We couldn't wait all day on you. We got an enemy out there. We got to go fight. Samuel said, you've taken too much up on yourself. You're not supposed to have done that. Only the priest is supposed to. And he rebuked him for it. Saul didn't listen. In fact, they go into war, chapter 14, over the Philistines. And when you think about it, the chances of winning, well, only Saul and Jonathan really have swords and spears. They've not been trained for battle. I mean, they're just not ready for war. There's panic, and they don't know what they're going to do. But God begins to speak to Jonathan again. Jonathan takes his servant and he says, hey, come on, let's go up and listen in. God's not limited. He can give victory to a few or to many. It doesn't matter. Let's go up. And when we get there, we'll reveal ourselves to them and we'll put it in God's hands. If they say, hey, come on up, we'll teach you, then we'll know God's delivered him and we'll go after him, just the two of us. If they say something else, and we'll know it's not God, and we'll get out of there. We'll disappear like they just accidentally found us. So they go, they reveal themselves, and they say, hey, come on up. We'll show you a thing or two. So Jonathan says, let's go. Now you look at the faith of Jonathan. How about of his servant? His servant had to know that Jonathan could hear from God, evidently. Two men don't take on an entire army. They go wading into the midst of the army, swinging the sword, killing. I mean, pretty soon the enemy's killing each other. Saul and his army wake up and they, what's going on over in the camp of the Philistines? They're going crazy. They're killing, and they take out after him and run after him. And God gives them mighty victory that day because of the panic that arises among the enemy when the ground begins to shake. God must have sent an earthquake along with it. Wow. Well, Saul says, verse 24, cursed be any man that eats food before enemy comes, or before evening comes. And before, notice this, I have avenged myself upon my enemies. So nobody ate anything. But throughout the day, they come up on some honey. And Jonathan goes, wow. And he grabs something, tastes it. He says, hey, you guys want something? They said, oh, no. And they look, and he says, what's wrong? Well, your father put a curse on anybody that ate anything and told us we couldn't eat anything until the victory was completely won. And Jonathan said, might not have been real smart. It would have been smarter for you guys to have eaten to have strength to get the job done. But oh well, he didn't eat anymore. Then they still go ahead. They win, thankfully, but not as successful as they could have. Saul says, "What's wrong here? Why don't we have God's blessings? What's going on?" And there's sin, there's disobedience in the camp. Saul says, "Well, we'll find out where this is. My son and I will stand here, and then we'll begin to isolate it. Just like God chose me to be king, we're going to find out and let God show us who did wrong. I don't care if it's my own son. We'll deal with him." They cast the lots. Falls on he and Jonathan. Huh? Cast the lots. It's Jonathan. He says, Jonathan, what did you do? Well, Dad, I didn't know you'd put out a command we couldn't eat anything, so I took a little bit. And I didn't eat any more after that. He said, but you disobeyed. We're going to have to destroy his own son because he ate a little honey? And the men all jumped up and said, no. The battle is over. We wouldn't have even had a victory if it hadn't been for Jonathan. And they forced Saul to leave Jonathan alone. Why? Pride. Finally, verse 27, 28, chapter 15. Samuel tells Saul, the kingdom is removed from you. It will be given to somebody that is worthy. One of the sad things is when Saul was talking to him. He tells him, verse 17 of chapter 15, although you were once small in your own eyes. When was it Saul was lifted up and made king? When he was small, when he felt, I'm insignificant, I'm the least of the least, when he hid. You say, well, that was not good. Well, it was because he didn't feel worthy. He didn't feel like he could. But he said, how things have changed now. When you were small, God was able to use you. But now that you've become so big and important, you have destroyed what God could do through your life. Not only through Saul's life, but we're going to find out in the following lessons, his whole genealogy basically was destroyed because of the pride that came in. You see, Saul said, I'm never going to see you again. Samuel said, correct. You never will. And Samuel never came again before Saul, though he cried and wept because he loved Saul as a son, almost. But he never saw him again. Oh, and chapter 16, verse 14, it says the Spirit of God that had come upon him, anointed him, empowered him. He was a great soldier, a great warrior, a great fighter. And yes, in the beginning, a humble man. And the Spirit of God had done mighty things through him. But the Spirit of God removed from him. And what this did is opened him up to evil spirits. Now, it's interesting there that it says from a spirit, evil spirit from the Lord. But we're dealing with Hebrew. You have to be careful translating Hebrew because it's a very inexact language, very simple, basic language, okay? Not critical, it's just the way it was. So you have to really watch the context around. This passage could also just as easily be translated an evil spirit from before the presence of the Lord, which fits if you turn to Job chapter 1, verse 6 and chapter 2, verse 1, where we see that Satan is walking and demanding the chance to get at Job. And it says that evil spirits at that time came from before the presence. Though it's not that they were his spirits or sent by him, but at that time somehow they still had access and into the throne and before God, and there was still this thing that God was establishing who he was. It was before Satan was totally, absolutely kicked out of heaven and all of his evil spirits with him. So that's probably what's being meant here, that this evil spirit from before came upon and jumped upon. And the only way he could, well, is because he allowed pride to overtake him. And it opened the door, causing the Spirit of God to leave, which allowed the spirit of evil to come in because of disobedience. Romans chapter 6, verse 16. Don't you know that when you offer yourselves to someone to obey him as slaves, well, you are slaves to the one whom you obey. Whether you are slaves to sin, which leads to death, or to obedience, which leads to righteousness, everybody's going to serve somebody. Everybody serves somebody. We either serve God by choice or we serve Satan by default because of human nature, because of, well, major factor, pride. So we are told in Proverbs 16:18, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. Beware of fall, of pride. Watch out for pride. It's like a seed that will get in and take over. Again, the secret, keep your eyes on Jesus. Keep your focus upon him. And as long as we do that, if we're looking at God, there's no way we can become prideful. The danger of pride, well, it's one of the evil things Jesus listed as defiling mankind. Mark 7:20-23. He said, what comes out of a man is what makes him unclean. For from within, out of men's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, that's pride, and folly. All these evils come from the inside and make a man unclean. Remember Israel's problem? They thought an outside man could fix everything. They didn't recognize that the real problem was coming from inside. The secret isn't fixing the outside, it's letting God fix the inside, and then he'll change the outside. But the focus has to be upon him and allowing him inside. We find that pride is one of the three major sources of sin. 1 John 2:16. Everything in the world, the cravings of sinful man, the lust of his eyes, and the boasting of what he has and does, it comes not from the Father, no, but from the world. All sins grow out of one or all of these three areas. And one of the major areas is the pride of life. It's the reason Paul in 1 Timothy 3:6 says, don't exalt the new convert. No, because they might become conceited, prideful, and that pride will cause them to fall to sin. This was the original reason Satan himself fell. Isaiah 14:12-17, and then Ezekiel 28:12-9, we believe are pictures. It's of human kings, but a lot of times in prophecies, there's a dual picture, something that's natural to portray something that's different. And as we look at these two passages, what's described here, yeah, there was an earthly king in each case that fulfilled part of it. But there were parts of it they couldn't fulfill. We see it goes beyond. So we think it was actually a picture of Satan himself when he was an angel of God. How that he was great and he was big and he was powerful and he was mighty. He was good. But he began to get full of himself until he eventually rebelled against God and, yes, was removed from his position and eventually will be removed totally, absolutely, forever from heaven. In fact, I believe he already has, but he would definitely will be totally and completely. Well, if that's so dangerous, and it can, I mean, we look at all the greats of the past that have fallen just in the Bible, and we're not in no way we're going to go through all of them. But think about it. Yeah, Satan was an angel, and he fell to pride. Children of Israel kept falling to pride. Samson and Saul and Rehoboam and basically all of Israel's kings fell to pride. And most of Judah's had struggles with it. And then even after their defeat and captivity, Belshazzar, Daniel chapter 5, Herod, we find in the New Testament, Acts 12:20-23, he gets swelled up with pride and he gets eaten up with worms. Kind of gross, isn't it? Anyhow, pride is a major destruction. How can we handle it? What can we do? Well, number one, beware in times of prosperity and success. Deuteronomy 8, verse 10, verse 11-20. When Israel was getting ready to enter into the promised land, God very clearly told them, when you're settled, when you have houses and homes and fields and crops, and when everything's going good, be careful that you keep your eyes on God. To the church world, let me say this. When you've built a new church, when you've seen great victories and you've had answers to prayer, celebrate them, yes, but be careful. Don't become prideful in what God has allowed you to accomplish. or what God has done through you. Don't allow your religion or even your concept of your importance to become so great that you say, look to me and I'll give you the answer because I am a servant of God. Well, at that point, the person's looking out, not up. Keep humility. I am a servant of God. Thank God for that privilege. I do belong to him. That's awesome. I've been given the awesome privilege of being a pastor. But you know what? That doesn't mean that I'm valuable. It means that he's valuable. And therefore, as I allow him to work and move through me, I have value. Oh, yes. My value is in him, not in me. Whatever you do, whether it's in the natural, whether it's in the spiritual, whatever you do all to the glory of God. 1 Corinthians 10:31. Whether you eat, drink, whatever you do all to the glory of God. You see, it's not wrong to have pride. It's not wrong to take pride in the things that you do. It is wrong to become prideful. Don't let pride enter in. Keep yourself humble before God. The more God does, the more you give him glory. The more somebody comes up and says, oh, you did a great job today. That was fantastic. Smile and say, thank you. Isn't he wonderful? I couldn't do anything without him. He is so awesome. He's there for us. Take praise, take honor, and immediately give it to the one it belongs to. And then he will be able to continue to use you in mighty ways. Be very careful. Beautiful examples, a couple of them in the New Testament. John the Baptist. Remember, they come to John chapter 3, 26-36, and they say, hey, John, everybody's going over to this other guy to get baptized. And John says, hey, that's okay. I came to introduce him. My honor is that he's exalted and that I fade out of the picture. Wow. What an attitude. No wonder John was blessed. Paul the Apostle, Galatians 6:14. May I never boast except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, though through which the whole world has been crucified to me, and I to the world. That's where my boast must be. My God is awesome. He's great. He's powerful. Oh, and I'm so privileged to be his servant. What grace. Paul always talked about God's grace. But in context, if you look at it, whenever he talked about the grace of God, he always referred to how that God chose him and used him. That was the grace. What grace we have. God has forgiven us of our sins, yes, but he's chosen me and chosen you. Every one of us are chosen of him. What grace. What a God we serve. To him be all glory and honor and praise, both now and forever. Amen.